Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day, or more appropriately, Ole Miss every day. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, extra edition. I'm here with Brian Smith, the recruiting expert for Locked On, and we're going to talk a little ball right now. How you doing, Brian?
Doing well, sir. How about yourself? Have a good fourth?
Yeah, pretty good, other than the fact that you can attest to this because you live 10 miles down the road from me. It was hot as the blazes on the 4th of July.
It's been bad all week, brother. It's been bad all week.
Yeah, finally the rain came through, and I'm hoping it broke it up a little bit. So,
yeah, it's not often that I ask for more rain in the summer here in Florida. Right now would be one of those times.
Yeah, because I joke with people all the time. It's like, you don't know what feels good until right before a thunderstorm hits down in Central Florida. That is the most comfortable temperature. It's just amazing.
And that humidity gets sucked up in a way, but then it comes back down on you in 10 minutes.
So. Yeah. It's just the way it is. Let's start a little bit. You sent me a picture of Noreel White, the wide receiver that is committed to Arkansas. Talk about that prospect a little bit.
That's a kid that if you said, Brian, do you want him to play safety, corner, or receiver, my answer would be yes. He's just a really good football player. He was recently out at the big 7-on-7 tournament in LA, and I sent him a message, and I said, how'd you do, this, that, and the other? He's like, I did pretty good. I said, who was the best DB there to guard you? He said, nobody can guard me. And I was just like, okay, well, all right, that kind of narrows it down. So he's been one of those kids that knew he was good for a long time. He's backed it up. He's shifty. He can take the ball off your head. He's all those things. But ironically, and I were talking about this, unless something changes, he's going to be a defensive back for the Arkansas Razorbacks. I would play him at receiver. I would get him the ball. That's just my opinion. But if the kid wants to play DB, hey, that's more power to him.
It feels like this is going to be a 6-month recruiting battle between Arkansas and Ole Miss, and it's going to be about defensive back play versus playing wide receiver in a Lane Kiffin system. And it feels like that's going to be the pitch from here until signing day.
Look, we've talked about this pretty much every time I've come on your show. It's not hard to pitch Lane Kiffin being the play caller if you're a skill player in his offense. Doesn't matter if you're a tight end, receiver, or running back. Good deal. So I agree. If I'm Ole Miss, it's not a real dynamic plan, but it's one that's got a lot of value based on factual data. So, I mean, name a kid that came in that wasn't dedicated to learning the playbook. Lane hasn't done something with him pretty much right away. He figures out a way to get freshmen on the field, too. More power to him because his offense, I mean, he's got a big brain. He's a goofball, but he's got a big brain. His book is not small, but he gets freshmen on the field. It's incredible.
And the amazing thing is, when you look at Noreel White, all he has to do is put on the film of Elijah Moore and what he did with Elijah Moore. And Noreel can apples to apples that.
Sometimes there's just a natural fit. And my guess is that somebody at Ole Miss might have mentioned that at some point and probably will in the future as well.
Yeah, this thing is so far from over. We'll see exactly what happens with Noreel White. Since the Miami Hurricanes, and you're down here and you have a little bit of an in with the Miami Hurricanes, Miami just got a commitment from an edge player from Illinois. And I don't know if that affects Kamarion Franklin specifically, but we're at that point whenever players are being recruited. What do you think that means for Kamarion Franklin?
Marquise Lightfoot is a traditional, pure, weak side defensive end. As far as I'm concerned, he's in a different planet than Kamarion. Because, I saw Kamarion at Miami's camp. That is a grown man. I'd met him a little over a year before, but he's thicker and stronger than he was even a year ago when I saw him in Dallas at Under Armour. They really don't play the same spot. And Miami has prioritized that kid. All the coaches were hovering around him. He was just there working out with Jason Taylor and stuff. They want him. I have no idea on a timeline. I was actually going to ask you about that because everybody's got an opinion about that. But to your prior point about White, if he commits, do you really think Lane Kiffin would care, or Mario, I mean, they're still going to recruit him anyway. So, really good football players get a lot of phone calls, brother.
Yeah, committed players, when you commit to a school, all that does is mean that other coaches are going to recruit you harder, and you've just named the leader. You haven't committed to anything.
That's the way it's looked at. Unless you just throw your phone away, nobody does that. Yeah, that's true.
All right, you did a breakdown for me, and I do appreciate that on William Eckles, the defensive lineman out of Houston. That's the same place where the curious case of Chris Jones happened, the same high school. And this is another player that's kind of been hidden and is a defensive lineman, and he is above his star ranking whenever you're recruiting. Now, I told Ole Miss people this, like if you put film of him playing offensive guard, yes, I can see that star ranking exactly, and that's how he was rated. I'm not going to argue with that overall. But whenever you put on the defensive field, the thing that struck me, most of the plays were happening at or behind the line of scrimmage. He wasn't catching running backs. And B, he could move. He had the athleticism to do it. Now, I forgot it. Art Kehoe was at Ole Miss, and he was there with me. Yeah, he was there with me whenever I was in Oxford, and he always raved about how defensive linemen made the best guards because of how athletic they were. And this is a similar type situation with a defensive lineman to offensive guard. So he probably has a decent ceiling on the interior offensive line, but he has a chance to be really good on the defensive line, right?
That's what I think. And I know I brought this up when I was doing my little overview of him. If you play 3-man line, he can play strong side D end, or he could play a 0 tech / 1 tech. You know, today's 3-3-5 stat, all these different schemes. You don't run one defense anymore. I mean, most teams don't. I mean, even Alabama and Georgia, they do some weird things when they play each other and stuff because both teams can score so much. You got to kind of keep teams off balance. And the other thing is, look, we've talked about this for a while. Ole Miss has needed more big guys up front to get to where they wanted to be to rotate, especially in the heat of Mississippi and stuff in those September games when you're playing LSU's and you're playing Alabama's and A&M. You got to be able to rotate more quality talent. This is another guy that can do that. So I think he's as good or better at defensive line like you do, and I think Ole Miss got to steal.
Yeah, and this is something that Ole Miss fans need to pay attention to as well. If Ole Miss can land Kamarion Franklin, I mean, that's a big if, but if that happens, you now have Jeffrey Rush, who I think is a solid, strong side defensive end as the floor at the SEC level. You have Cameron Beavers, who is a 3 technique waiting to happen that you see coming out of Mississippi all the time. You've got William Eckles that can fit in and play that nose guard. He can even play some 3 if you need him to. And if you put Cameron Beavers on the other side and let him play jack and get after the quarterback and do a lot of the stuff that Will Anderson did, you've just recruited your defensive line for the future in one class.
That's what Alabama and Georgia do that's so different than everybody else in the SEC consistently. It's not all we had a great D-line class. They get one pretty much every year. And that's why they're the teams that at least one of them's in the SEC title game every year. It's just D-line recruiting. Their corner and all that stuff's good too, but their D-line recruiting is way different. Ole Miss is trying to do that, and this is a special class. We've talked about the state of Mississippi. There's nothing wrong with recruiting out of state too, but if they're in your freaking backyard, Stephen, you know this. You worked at Ole Miss. Like, you guys went a little harder for the local kid. Because once you get those kids on campus, it means there's pride involved. It means something to be a rebel. It's cool to have your friends around. They're going to put forth the effort. They have to get these kids.
Yeah, if you look at the old school recruiting, the recruiting that happened when I was there, and I was there, like I said, with Ed Orgeron, and it did that. Basically, you just put a protractor on a map, go to 4 hours around from where the university is, and you've got to win all those battles in there, as many as possible. And
it's it's not rocket science.
Yeah, it's not hard, and that's also part of the reason like recruiting the coast traditionally is difficult for Ole Miss because if you look at that 4 hour circle, that gets you to about Hattiesburg.
Yeah, it's about another 30 to 45 minutes away where you start getting into some of those towns. They got some ball players. Closer you get to Mobile, the closer it is to Auburn and Alabama territory too. So LSU recruits well down there, etc. LSU's got a ton of kids along the coastline off I-10 over the years. So it's difficult, but when they beat LSU and they beat Alabama and they beat A&M, et cetera, down in that area, they're going to do good in Jackson to Memphis. At least they usually do. You can sprinkle in some of those 4 and 5-star kids off the coast. That's when Ole Miss has a chance to have a top 10 class right there.
Yeah, it's really, really phenomenal what the state of Mississippi can produce talent-wise to be such a small state.
Yeah, per capita, it's always top 10 in the nation, sometimes top 3 for NFL in a given NFL draft. It's insane.
Yeah, and it's right next to Louisiana, which would be in that 4-hour hurlough as well, and they're the same
Oh,
boat.
it's the same stuff. Exactly the same stuff, 100%.
Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We will continue our season game-by-game looks whenever we tune in next week. We start with the October games as well. I'll start telling you about Arkansas and Auburn and all of that. 3 games in October, but we'll go over that. Anyway, thank you very much, Brian, for stopping by, and we'll talk to you next week, buddy.
I appreciate it, sir. Have a good one.
All right, man.